no further ado, let me welcome you to our 4th webinar in our Spring CitySprouts Teacher Forum series. We designed these webinars anew this year, and they're really meant to connect everyone to our gardens. And our guests are always teachers. So we have invited the teachers that we work with, teachers whose work we admire and are inspired by, and we're sharing this with other teachers and other interested people to showcase the really excellent ways that the school garden is being used for instruction, and not only instruction actually, for building class community, for establishing a culture of respect and curiosity, for supporting children's healthy social, emotional development. For instance, in last week's webinar, we had 3 teaching staff from the King Open Elementary School in Cambridge, along with our garden coordinator, Erin Taylor, who showed some of the ways that their school garden is really used to help channel children's energy, help students focus and find ways to positively contribute back to their school community. In our webinar today, we're going to hear from 4 educators in Boston at the David Ellis Elementary School who all use their school garden for writing and for specifically garden storytelling in both narrative and also poetic form. So we hope that the stories that our teachers are going to share with you today and their examples will inspire your questions, your comments about integrating the garden with a lesson outside or bringing the garden into the classroom, both of which we here at CitySprouts consider garden-based learning. So we hope that you will consider this an invitation to start more conversations, and both with your own children's teachers, with your class, with other teachers, with other garden coordinators. So my name, as I said, is Jane Hershey, and I am the director at CitySprouts, and I'm going to, without further ado, introduce you to the first of our teachers speaking today, and that is Boone Silipavan. And she is a kindergarten teacher at the David Ellis School, and she's going to talk to us a little bit and show us some pictures about how she uses that garden for storytelling. So welcome, Boone.
Hello. I teach an integrated K0, K1 classroom with special needs students working alongside regular ed students. So this school year, I took my 3-, 4-, and 5-year-olds to the garden to explore the concept of gardening. So they had opportunity to dig the soil, plant seeds, water the seeds. They got a chance to explore the different various vegetables and fruits, and to look inside those vegetables and fruit and explore the various seeds. And from this background information, it led the way to when we started doing storytelling in the classroom. In order for them to recall what they did, one of the method that I use was story in a box. And how story in a box works is that you could put any items in there, but in this case I chose, seed, flower, and I put a little Lego girl, and then one at a time you randomly pick these items out, and the students would volunteer to provide a sentence that would relate to that to the gardening. So the stories that they came up with, I'll just read one of them. This is the whole group activity, and this is the story they came up with. There's a little girl, and her name was Bella, and she wanted to build a sunflower. And then the brother came out and was seeing what his sister was doing. First, she put the seeds in the hole, and she covered it with dirt. And she watered the plant, and it grows and grows and grows. And she watered it again, and then a medium flower grows and grows, and she gave it to her brother. So a lot of my students enjoy this process, and they love providing sentences. And as a teacher, you actually have to prompt them to make sure, what could come next that makes sense. And after storytelling, we usually do story acting. And it's just a great process because it helps with oral language, it helps with picking up new vocabulary, and also it's just a way to build community in the classroom. And these are 2 examples from individual students, and they're very creative. But in the end, if you read them, it just shows a nice story about the garden, but also it's just a friendly tone. It's just a happy tone. And Gabriella's story captured a lot of the activities she did in the garden, because she also brought in the concept of apple cider, which we explored with Michelle from CitySprouts. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Boone. And Itonia, we can hear you, but if you can speak directly into that telephone, it would be even better. Thank you.
No problem.
No, that's great. Okay. Welcome, Itonia.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be a part of the CitySprouts program. I'm a third grade teacher, and some of the things that I've been able to do with my students in the garden, and first of all, they love going out there and looking forward to the spring, is using different strategies. One of them was using the KWL graphic organizer, because one of my concerns was their reading and math scores. So I decided to take that out into the garden and see what I could come up with. And looking at their scores, they weren't so happy with them. But once they got into the garden, was able to explore the seeds and talk about the area, I've noticed that their interest was not just with the garden, but with learning, reading, math. What else can I say? The students actually had an opportunity to adopt one of the plants, and they wrote book reports and had the opportunity to also share with the parents and some of the staff in the classroom. Is that a question? No, don't worry about that. Okay. But we also tied it in with art activities, and they've been able to really examine not just what was in the garden, but share at home the ideas of what they did with Michelle. Is it Michelle? And one of the parents even made comments about the different foods that were out in the garden that she wasn't aware of, and that she wanted to try and explore at home with her family. Sure.
That is exciting to see. It's really exciting when parents come in and you already see those links happening with home.
Yeah. I did also have the students use poetry in the garden along with adopting the plants, and that was a part of their writing assignment. And the poems that they created were acrostic poems, but they are now starting to go into another area in science, which is seeds again, so they'll be writing more stories about that in their journals.
Itonia, what kind of poem did you say that was?
Acrostic.
Okay.
Okay, the students had the opportunity in small garden stations outside to prepare a garden salad and dressing with Michelle and give her verbal feedback. But they also did a write-up for her. So they're waiting for her to return to come back and share that with them. They learned about healthy eating, being responsible. And now I'm noticing that the fruits that they have during breakfast and lunch, they're no longer being returned to the cafeteria. They're taking them home.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And Susan, we've got our third example of how writing is happening in the garden at the David Ellis School. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you very much. My name is Susan Minahan, and I am a fourth grade teacher at the David A. Ellis School. At the time of our garden visit, we were beginning to work on an ELA unit, and the name of the unit was Reading to Learn About Poetry. And the students in my class were toying with this question, what makes a poem a poem? And they recently had come to the realization that there are many different types of poems. There are some poems that tell stories, there are some poems that have rhyme and rhythm, and there are some like free verse that have no rhyme or rhythm or any particular structure, and the free verse poem was going to be the focus of this activity. So it was a beautiful autumn day, and half of my class was working in the garden with Michelle, and the other half was sitting on the grass that surrounds the garden with their writer's notebooks on their laps. So I asked them to sit for approximately 2 or 3 minutes and think about different things that they could see, hear, feel, taste, or touch. They were going to use their senses. And then after that, they were asked to write a free verse poem, and if they had time, to illustrate their poem. Given the fact that free verse poetry has fewer constraints than other forms of poetry, I felt that the students felt comfortable with this assignment. They were confident that they could complete the task. So when we returned to the classroom, there were definitely students who needed more time to complete this activity. So I gave them some additional time, and at the end of the time, every student was able to produce a free verse poem and an illustration. And they were so excited about writing their poems that they asked me if they could share their poems with their classmates. So we took some time for students to share their poems. And from there on in, their enthusiasm and excitement for writing poetry continued.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Susan.
You're welcome.
I think I'm going to just ask a quick question, Michelle, because I think other people might be thinking it too, as these 3 teachers have talked about their students in the garden, and all of them are doing some kind of writing. And of course, you know, you can do writing without a garden. Teachers do it all the time. And I just wondered if Boone and Itonia and Susan could each just answer, even briefly, or less than briefly, what does the garden add to your lesson your writing lesson in the garden? What do you feel like is different because you've got the garden element in it for the students in these lessons that actually could be done just in the classroom?
Let me take it off speakerphone.
Okay.
Hi, this is Boone. Basically, I think the garden, when we use it during storytelling, it lets their story stay with that theme. Because if I didn't let them, you know, if I say, just tell me a story, then I would have 3, 4, and 5 who would tell me about everything, and then a little bit would be disconnected. By having to focus on the garden, the story was more streamlined. And it also helped them to bring out their knowledge that they had, what they did in the garden, and it added to the story. The actions that they did in the garden, they were able to bring it back and incorporate into their stories. So that's how I definitely think the story for the garden was beneficial.
Yeah, thank you. So it has an organizing factor, both in theme and helping them focus. Thank you. How about you, Itonia?
Hi, it's Itonia. I think the garden has offered the students a chance to not just visually bring something back from the garden, but it's also giving them hands-on experience. So when they're, let's say, working in math and they're working on arrays, they have that visual of what the garden boxes look like, so then they can draw it and then actually go back out and experience. So every lesson adds on to the experience coming from the garden. They're constantly trying to bring me back out to the garden for every lesson that they're doing, art, music. Let's go back out to the garden and see what we can find and discover.
Yeah, that's interesting. I know that is a strong theme in teaching about frequency of experience and giving kids opportunities to build on that experience.
Definitely
how about you?
Multisensory.
And multisensory too, right? And
Yeah.
that piece too, yeah.
Yeah.
And Susan?
Hi, this is Susan, and my students were writing free verse poems, but they were using their 5 senses to write the poem. So I think it made it much more realistic for them because they were actually experiencing things at the time. There were some men that were cutting down trees with power saws, so that was something they heard, and they were feeling the grass in their fingers. So I think the whole experience made writing poetry much more real for them.
That's interesting. I was sort of wondering about that timber in the picture of the tree lawn.
Right,
Thank you for explaining that.
Okay, you're welcome.
And I know others may have questions, so please do type your questions down in the chat box, and we'll come to those questions again after Michelle speaks. So, Michelle, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Okay. So I'm Michelle Kaufman. I'm the garden coordinator at David Ellis School. So I just wanted to give a little bit of background for the setup of the garden and kind of what we think about when we're planting one. So in terms of like when classes come out to the garden, it's always really great to have a lot of things, not only that they can touch, but also that they can taste. And so herbs are really great for tasting, and they grow in really large quantities, so you can, you know, give everybody in the class a mint leaf or a chive or something like that. And then in terms of vegetables, I tried to have kind of a mix of half and half, some that are really familiar so that it doesn't feel like this foreign place, like everybody has had a tomato and can see a tomato and recognize it and get excited about it. And then other things that are maybe less familiar, like I was just thinking about the fall. We had a yellow summer squash growing, and one of the students came out and was like, oh my gosh, a banana tree. And so just kind of a mix of familiar and less familiar. And then we have a garden bed that's filled with perennials that provides a lot of beauty for the garden and also helps a lot with pollination and maintains the soil health throughout the winter. So that can be a whole lesson in itself. And then soon, I believe this spring, we are going to be putting in a fruit tree. So in terms of teacher collaboration at Ellis, it comes in a variety of forms, and there's a lot of different types of classes that come out. I found that both the ELL and the lab classes find it especially helpful to come out at least once a week, both for learning vocabulary and having that vocabulary be really hands-on, and also for the lab classes, it's a really good release of physical energy. A lot of the students would just come and want to mix compost the whole time, and you just get to use your physical strength, and that's really helpful.
Michelle, can you explain what a lab class means, what lab means, and ELL?
Yeah, so lab we just learned what it stands for, language adaptive behavioral. So students that have behavioral issues, and ELL is English language learners. So those are students that haven't learned English as a first language. And kind of this was evident in how the different teachers here during this webinar use the garden, but some of them will do a lesson in the classroom and then come outside to show that lesson in a more hands-on form, whereas others, like Ms. S was saying, is you come out and use the lesson, you use the garden and do an activity, and then when you go back in the classroom, you can do a lesson about that activity. So kind of use the garden as that launching pad. So with Ms. S, we started in the fall doing just a lot of kind of general exploration of the garden and getting familiar with it. And then we transitioned into doing some more specific math in the garden and counting leaves. But I thought this was a really great example, which I think is especially helpful with younger grades, where you can't really have them be focusing on too many different things at once. So if you go into the garden and just have that experience without talking about why you're going or what you're going to do afterwards, it makes it easier for the students to be really in the moment and just share the experience together. And then when you go back in the classroom, then you can go from there and say, okay, we all just planted carrots together. now let's think about, you know, what that was like. Let's write a story about it. Let's draw a picture about it, but not overloading that right in the beginning or trying to do too much from the start. And my work with Itonia was a little different, where she definitely took the lead on a lot of these projects. So, you know, her class came out and we did a garden tour and looked at what the different trees were growing, and then each student chose something that they wanted to study, and they came out to the garden many times without the garden coordinator there to do lessons there. And I think that this was both a really good example of having lessons both in the garden and in the classroom, because it seems like you did a lot in the garden, and then going back into the classroom, you were still constantly talking about that. And also really demonstrates using the garden for studying a plant and doing research. So that's science and learning how to write about that research and learning how to write poetry. So just using it in a lot of different disciplines. You get over one topic, so you can say you're going to choose a plant, and with this plant, you're going to do some scientific research and do some art and draw the plants and all sorts of things based off one activity. And then with Miss Minahane, I remember really clearly the day that her students came into the garden, and we split into two groups, and one of the groups were doing different garden tasks while the other group was writing their poem. And I thought that this was just really important to be having a direct hands-on experience in the garden at the same time as trying to write poetry and feel it, how you're relating to that poem that you're writing. It made it much more personal for them to be able to do the work in the garden and then write from that, write a poem about what that is like and what it's like to be in the garden. And it was also a nice mix of when you're writing your poem, you have your alone time and you're not talking to other students, and when you're working together in the garden, you're all doing a task together and helping one another out. And I know that Ms. Minay mentioned this as well, but all her students were just like coming up to me throughout the whole time wanting to read all their poems and get all their words in, tell me what they wrote before they went inside. So they were just very proud of what they did.
Great, thank you. And what a great picture to end on. Looks like warm weather in the beach and a gorgeous day in the garden, no less. Thank you. I don't see a lot of questions down there on the bottom, but I've got a couple of questions that we've got one from Greg about a story in the box. And so, Boone, this is a question for you. I think Greg is saying he'd love to use that idea, and I have a question just about where that idea came from. Is that how did you come up with that, or is that something that's part of a unit that you use?
I actually do a lot of research when it comes to getting the best method for storytelling. In this case, because we did the garden during the fall, I wanted to have them recall that memory. Like, how am I going to retrieve it? Because it's been a few months back. So I found one of the methods I saw online was the story in a box, and then I went around, trying to see what can I put in there that would make sense, and that's how I came up. I did my research first, so it's there was another method that I used in the classroom for storytelling. Is also where I just have one item, and basically in this you could pick anything. Let's say if it's when it's related to the garden, you could pick let's say I actually used celery, and I said, let's talk about where this is going to, let's look at this. What is it? Where did it come from? Who planted it? What is it used for? And from there, the students came up with sentences after sentences, trying, building around that one item. It was amazing. So that's another concept. And I also just let them, just say, this is a topic. I want you to come up with this creative story about this specific topic. And that's how some of the students came up on their own. With their stories tying in with the garden. So, but Storybox came from researching other teachers, other work that's around storytelling. So that helps.
Yeah, thank you. That's so interesting. We think of it as just sort of a natural thing that just happens, but really we learn how to be storytellers. And that's a really interesting way that you pull back past experiences in a very visual and physical and sensory way for them to remember that. And we have another question here from Brendan, which is, I think, a question for everyone about other kinds of writing that you three teachers have done. For instance, more descriptive writing or science-based writing. Can any of you talk about that a little bit, about some other kinds of writing that you've done beyond the lessons that you showcased here?
I haven't done any science-based writing, but thinking about this, it's something that I'd definitely like to try with my classroom. I think the garden would be a great resource for that type of writing.
Yeah, thank you, Susan.
You're welcome.
How about Itonia or Boone?
I haven't actually started a new writing, but I am trying to get more parents involved, and so I'm starting a idea of a fundraiser that's going to, any money that goes towards it will go towards CitySprouts. So I'm working on an idea for that. And what the students will do is start an indoor type of plant, but it's going to be, I'm trying to tie in a theme of community and walking. So I'm waiting for parents to bring in old shoes from the children.
That sounds like a wonderful thing. We'd love to see photos of that. I'm sure that will be great. How about you, Boone? Have you done any science writing with your young students in the garden?
Well, not science yet, because we basically have used storytelling as well as math. But the science will come up because in one of the K1 curriculum, it's the unit, Things That Grow. It's Unit 6, so that's going to be coming around May. And one of the assignments that I actually do with the children is basically having them investigate the parts of the plants, and then from there they label what each of the parts are, from the roots to the stem to the leaves, so they get to actually know the terms that correspond to what they're looking at. So that's what they'll be doing in the when we go to that unit, Things That Grow. That's their science.
So incorporating botany, that sounds wonderful. And I know that there is an emphasis in the new next generation science standards on more science writing in the garden. So the work that you teachers have done around taking the children out for poetry will certainly be a good foundational experience for them as they go out in other grades and as they move through your elementary school to go out for other writing as well. So just one more advantage that yet will come to pass from spending time in the writing. Itonia, you've mentioned a couple times, and even in your presentation, about connecting with families, with parents. Is that, talk a little bit about that goal. I think that that's a school goal as well as your personal goal as a teacher, to engage parents.
It's not just a personal goal for me. I'm always trying to make sure the parents are connected to the school. So I will send home, I call it parent homework. Children like hearing that I'm giving their parents homework instead of just them.
I bet they do.
And it's usually just an index card about something they like to see in the garden, or if they can volunteer and come to the school or do some type of mini lesson in reference to things that they like about eating healthy, or certain foods that they've never tried. I had one parent say that she actually went out and bought collard greens because she wasn't familiar with it until her son came home and talked about it. And after reading his book report, she said she wanted to definitely look into more of what was growing in our garden.
Oh, that's wonderful. So it sounds like the garden, but also particularly growing food in the garden, is a way to connect with parents.
Definitely. And they get to actually see it and come out to the school and try different things.
Yeah, that's wonderful. CitySprouts was part of helping to build that garden 2 years ago at the David Ellis School. And I have to say that one of the most rewarding moments of my 14-year career in school gardening was seeing that garden on the first day of school. And I think every teacher came out into that garden with their class. It was as if you all had been waiting for a school garden, and both the students and the teachers just leapt right into it. It was really gratifying to see how much you all make use of that garden.
Anything new that can inspire the children to learn and teachers to also participate in learning and teaching is welcomed.
Yes. Well, it's truly a joyful place at the David Ellis School. And the lessons and the poems that you've shared from your students here just reinforce that. So do we have anything else to add about writing before we move on? Teachers, is there one last thing you'd like to add for anybody who's listening in about advice that you have for them, or something that's on your idea list for what you'll be trying next? It sounds like maybe we got all your advice. Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you all so much. That was inspiring and great to hear. And it's really wonderful too that we've got a record of these lessons and some of the student work that you shared. I'm really thrilled about being able to put that into our library. I have a reminder for everybody who is on the webinar today, and that is that you will get a certificate of professional development credit for having been part of our conversation today. If you are a Cambridge or a Boston school teacher, you can also get district credit as well. So if you're not signed up with your district system and need any help, let us know and we can help you do that. And I want to invite all of you back for our last forum of the season, the next Thursday on living organisms. And we'll be back in Cambridge at the Amigo School with some of the very early elementary teachers at the Amigo School who are using their school garden for teaching living organisms. And after watching the webinar today, I'm going to be very curious about how much science writing they do in their garden with that unit. So it's wonderful to see these blends and the bridges that the garden can make for teachers between subjects, between grades, and even between cities across districts. So thank you all again. Thank you very much, Boone, Itonia, and Susan for sharing your great lessons with us, and Michelle for facilitating that from our Boston School Garden. And please all join us next week for a last webinar session on living organisms. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.